Hello, I'm Chris Flisher, and welcome to Turning of the Wheel, an intelligent, lively discussion on astrology, art, and adventure. Timing is everything, and as the great wheel turns, we are best prepared when we are best informed. Join me as I explore the current planetary alignments and offer insights for coping with change. Educational, informative, enlightening, the Turning of the Wheel is a welcome pause in your daily swirl of constant change. Through intelligent discourse, inspired guests, and educational segments, I will help to enlighten your knowledge of astrology and guide you to accept change as the great wheel of life turns. Call in with your questions and speak with some of the greatest visionaries in the time-tested practice of astrology. Turning of the Wheel, Astrology, Art, and Adventure with Chris Flisher, each week on Turning of the Wheel podcast.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Turning of the Wheel. My name is Chris Flisher. This is a show about astrology, art, and spiritual adventure, and we're going to go on quite an adventure today. About several years ago, back in the 2007, I ran into Alex Gray in New York City. He's a famous artist, and in his bookstore was a book called Damanhur. And I picked up the book, and I looked through it, and I was absolutely captivated by it. And then about 2.5 years after that, I had the luck of going to Italy to this wonderful spot. And during the course of my association with Contact Talk Radio, I found out about a remarkable man who had just come back and created a film about this remarkable place in Italy, and it's called The Dreams of Damanhur. And my guest today is Keith Busha. He is a independent film producer, and he spent a considerable amount of time at this fantastic spot on the planet, which is almost indescribable. But having been there myself, I know exactly what it's all about, and I want to try to impart that sort of energy to you all. And I think that between Keith and myself, we'll be able to get that across as well as discuss this fantastic film. So, Keith, first of all, thank you so much, and welcome to the show.
Oh, yeah, thanks for having me, Chris. This is great.
Yeah.
It's so unusual I get to talk to someone who's actually been there. So
I know. You probably spend most of your time describing what it's like to others, and that's what we can work on here about that whole idea. So you sort of stumbled on Damanhur, maybe perhaps much the way I did. How did you end up getting there?
I was working on a film in Mexico, and one of the people I went down there with, a Dutch journalist, mentioned Damanhur and said that he had been spending time at this place with the underground temple complex, and it sounded absolutely unbelievable. And then I went to Europe to start a documentary about art colonies in Europe. And Damanhur kept kind of rattling around in the back of my head, and I wrote to them, and I phoned them and said, would you be interested in having me come? I'd like to take some photographs of the art that you've been doing. Well, they said, oh, yeah, that sounds great, but nothing definitive ever happened. And so I'd been in Europe almost 2 months, and I was getting ready to leave, and the emails had been going back and forth, and I kind of finally got the feeling that it probably wasn't going to happen, and I was ready to leave. And then I got an email, and they said, can you come right away? Huh. So I came, and I spent that point just a couple days there, and realized as soon as I landed, before I'd even met any Damanhurians, there was something very special going on there, and it wasn't about the art. It was about the community. It was about so much more. The art was just a minor player here. And then I was leaving, and I had no intention, again, of doing a film about him, and I met a Spiridae who is kind of the international ambassador of the community, and she said, if you are interested in making a documentary, we can help you by giving you complete access to everything and anyone and any materials that we have. And so I left kind of wondering whether this was a good thing to do, and I went back 5 times.
Had you, at that point, when you were at that point of decision, had you been inside the temples yet at that point?
Yes. I had taken a tour of the temples, but again, it was I knew the temples were there. I'd seen the pictures. I knew I was going to be blown away with the temples. But it was so much more. I mean, the temples, as you know, are a very unearthly, unbelievable place to be.
Yeah, they are.
And you're kind of speechless, and it's hard to describe. When people ask, what's it like? It's kind of like, well, what are the words? I mean, you really use all the regular words.
Yeah, you really have no words. That's the point, and it is phenomenal.
It's like being on another planet. I imagine, like if you were an astronaut and coming back, and people say, "Well, what was it like?" I mean, how do you describe another planet to somebody?
Yeah, you have to show pictures. I think that's really the truest place. I mean, it wasn't until I walked there, and I was there with I actually interviewed Esperde about a month or two after I had heard about Damanhur through Alex Gray and his gallery in New York City. And I bought the book when I was there through a friend of mine who suggested it and introduced me to it all, and I was blown away by the pictures. And then when I spoke with her about it, she gave me a flavor for it. But it's interesting for your commentary of, your take on it, because the art, to me, was a huge piece of it because it's so astounding. But it really is the community that overrides all of that.
Right. I mean, I'm not playing down the art to any degree at all. I mean, it's amazing.
Oh, no, I know.
And the accomplishments they've done, and the fact that most of these people weren't artists when they went there. The people that did the amazing stained glass work, one of the main players in that department was a plumber. These are self-taught people. But I just realized you probably sensed it too. As soon as you're on the property, there's kind of an electricity, and you see these very, very focused, intelligent people doing research in all these different areas, and you see them actually accomplishing something rather than just talking about it, and that's pretty stimulating.
Oh, and it's incredible because they are very erudite, intelligent people who are very, it's not like, the words that come to mind when you try to describe Damanhur are obviously commune and stuff like that, and so you automatically picture people sitting around eating brown rice and walking around in sandals,
right.
And that's not at all what Damanhur is about. Damanhur is very urbane. People are dressed very trendy. They're very hip, cosmopolitan people who are incredibly intelligent and very focused on pursuing the oneness and the goodness of what life has to offer and spreading that word worldwide.
Right, and they it's a 24-hour-a-day job for them. I mean, I talk about the fact that it's hard to imagine a Damanhurian sleeping, and I say that jokingly, but well, actually, it is. It's hard to imagine them in a state of rest because they're always going from one project to another project. And tirelessly too. They all seem to be like they could use a little rest, but no, it's okay. We'll just keep going. And it's amazing. I mean, they have an amazing source of energy there that they're drawing on or creating.
Well, yeah, and that raises the question about the synchronistic lines. They're one of the reasons that Damanhur is where it is because it's based on a series of energy lines that are sort of make up a grid that are sort of run underneath the current or underneath the crust of the earth that sort of connects energy centers. And of course, we see this in sacred geometry when you look at some of the greater cathedrals and the spiritual temples throughout the world. They're all connected on a grid. So Damanhur was located there so that they could be on that grid and sort of disseminate their glow and their information out through that grid, literally. Is that how you understood it?
Pretty much. Yeah, I guess it's kind of ley lines, what the Easterners call the ley lines, or the lines of the dragon, or the back of the dragon, or there's some kind of energy lines, and they spent quite a lot of time before beginning the temple digging, looking for places where these ley lines intersected, and they found there were two that had the most intersections, and one was in Tibet, and the other was at Damanhur, which, interestingly enough, was Falco, who was the leader or the founder, was very close to where he was born. He was born in Turin, and this is just a half an hour north of Turin. So it was pretty convenient. And then they discovered this spot, and Falco bought the mountain top, and then waited, and then decided to start building when he felt it was right. I should say start digging.
Yeah, and that in itself, if for people who don't understand Damanhur, that is as a physical feat in itself is simply remarkable. By nothing else about Damanhur other than that, just that alone is remarkable because they had to dig. They're 10, 15 stories underground, I think, right? Isn't that what you said? Something like that. And there's this enormous, huge. It's like walking into a cathedral, but it's 15 stories underground. It's all dug by hand.
Right. No, that defies belief. Absolutely defies belief. And the fact it was done secretly It was done even the neighbors were clueless. Nobody in that valley knew what they were doing. And I don't know how they accomplished that, because I live in kind of a rural area, and you bring us up a couple of concrete trucks down our road, everybody's wondering who's building.
Right.
And the amount of materials that they had to bring in and take out all that rock, and it just defies belief.
It's almost superhuman, and that's not an overstatement, I would think, because when you walk through the temples and you see the amount of work that's done, and you have no idea what's going on behind the artwork. I mean,
right.
All the artwork, because it's underground, is lit up through some sort of electrical lighting system. There's all kinds of grid work. There's all the rebar that had to be poured for the cement. There's all these elaborate stained glass and beautiful statues and paintings. It really is incredible.
And then there's tremendous amount of copper behind all of that. Something like 300 tons of copper they imported.
Which is the conductor for all the energy?
Yes. As you probably remember, they built into a vein of and they didn't know this at the time. The geologists later, when they did work on kind of sizing up the temple for the government, for the Italian government, the geologists came in and they said that what the Damanhurians had done is built into almost a solid vein of something called mylarite, which it's not a rare mineral, but apparently it's very rare to have it in a vein. And so it's a very conductive material. So they built into that and then imported all of this copper and then ran a copper line from the temples down to where the guest area is.
Oh, right, the Kriya.
Yeah. No, not the Kriya. The other one.
Olami.
Olami, correct, yeah. There's copper running all the way from the temples down there, because that's where they have their self-healing area. So, yeah, the amount of effort is just phenomenal. And then, you talk about that aspect of it, but then there's all the rest of it. The fact they've created their own language, and they have their own money, and they have their own economic system, their own constitution, they're self-sufficient in terms of food and almost self-sufficient in terms of energy. Then they have their scientific research departments, and on and on and on.
Yeah, it does go on and on and on in ways that are almost hard to grasp for us, because we, in our societies, in the conventional societies, we see ourselves so encumbered by red tape and trying to raise funds. These folks have just gone off and said, we're going to go do it, and they're doing things perhaps in an unconventional, sort of untested and uneducated manner to some degree, but through a result of that sort of rawness, they are actually coming upon things that are remarkable.
Absolutely. Yeah, they don't, I believe, feel there are any limits, and they don't wait around to be given permission or wait around for the time to be right, or for the most part, they see something they want to do and they jump in and do it. And this is why they've been able to accomplish, one of the reasons they've been able to accomplish so much. They see a need and they fill it. I know they realized there was no Red Cross in that part of northern Italy, so they created one. There was no civil defense group up there, so they created one. If the traffic lights go out or something, they replace them. They don't wait around for the government to come and fix them. Or the roads need work, they go out and do the road work.
It's sort of, I have been talking quite a bit as an astrologer over the last several years on my radio show about sort of the coming of time, because based on the planet Neptune moving through the later degrees of Aquarius indicates a time of tribal renewal. And because of, the Earth is coming, the planet right now is going through such difficulty with regards to, the banks and mortgages and finances and countries being bailed out, all these financial systems are crumbling. This is sort of what all those things indicate is a degree of self-sufficiency. And what Damanhur has done long before this happened is sort of they imbue everything with that same sense of self-sufficiency.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, and interconnectedness too. All of these different aspects of their community have to work together, and I think, Chris, that's one of the reasons that they've limited the size of their community to basically what it is now. They don't want to grow too very much more because they feel they'll lose that connectedness. From what I understand, the idea is that they want to keep it in the same general numbers of people so that everybody in the community knows everyone else. They feel if it gets any bigger than that, they will lose touch and not be able to function as well.
Yes, there's about 750 people there now in their community, and they are they have a central focus, which is the actual the Olami, and they have what's called the Damanhur Kraya, which is their store, the Damanhur Mall, so to speak, and and then they have the temples, of course, and then they have the these outlying groups of people who all belong to this. So they really are a country within a country, and I think that the ability for them to interconnect on that level is probably just about the right size. That's 750 people who are part of it. And it's a very, in order to belong or order to even consider to become a member, you've got to sort of go through a trial period, as I understand it.
Right.
And it's just remarkable to watch this sort of. I mean, I almost see it as a. I think one of the words you mentioned was this web of people, this interconnectedness, which is a great sort of word to describe them, because they do have individual pieces of them, like states, perhaps. When you have these little communities of 30 or 40 people or 10 or 20 people live together in a house, but they are all connected to the larger community. It's sort of a microcosm of a country in a way.
Right. And I think this is fundamental to understanding part of their philosophy, which is they believe that a single person has a very limited amount of power and is limited in what they can accomplish in their life. But you put a group together with a focus and tenacity and follow-through, really there's nothing you can't accomplish. And they've proven this by, the temples, of course, by building this community, by their scientific inventions. But also, like you're saying, the individuality is important. And I think they really stress that everyone there is an individual and has to bring what makes them themselves, makes them special, bring that to the community.
And I do like that, because there is that tribal sense to it,
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And they are very, very, very respectful of nature and our place in nature, and they take a great deal of they go to great pains to sort of emphasize that with regard to. I mean, everybody's name there is based on the name of an animal, and so they sort of pay great homage to the role of everybody on the planet and everything on the planet. Don't you think that's pretty evident there?
Well, absolutely, and it's really clear when you come into their parking lot of Alami or the Kriya. They paint the buildings, the sides of the buildings, with giant pictures, images of animals and insects, and part of that is just like you say, to pay homage to nature, because they believe that the insects are as important as the animals, and the animals are as important as man, and we're all kind of the same in that, in terms of respect and having to get along on the planet.
Yeah, it comes back to that interconnectedness. It's right. Sort of from the smallest to the largest, and that there is that sense of connectivity. And I have always been thinking that way myself, that we are all connected. And I think that sort of the logic of the universe points to that very clearly when you think about how everything is dependent upon others. And so therefore the impact that individuals can have is not as profound as that of a group. So this group does have a significant impact because of their sort of, united we stand kind of approach. And if they're and I think their intention is always about expansion and enlightenment and experimentation and sort of pushing limits in every way they can.
Right. And they call it research. You probably remember that every time they start a new project, it's research, and they're doing research into this. They're doing research into fish farming. They're doing research in their cheese making. They're doing research into time travel. They're doing research into community building.
Yeah.
So it's all this ongoing educational process for them, and I think that's what's really exciting. They don't latch on to something and say, "Well, this is it." this is it. It's always being developed and always being. Well, the research goes on, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah, I mean, they are truly open to possibilities, I think, and as a result of that, they don't think of anything as undoable. They think that they have a collective willpower that I think can sustain, introduce, and develop almost anything that you can possibly imagine. I mean, one of the more phenomenal things that I found was the use of the Celtic symbols, which is a language unto itself, which looks very much like hieroglyphics. And interestingly enough, having been there's one of the temples that has that Falco did. Falco is the founder of Damanhur, and there's one room where he did all these symbols, and it's all symbols that look like glyphs. Now, glyphs are sort of just, they look like letters, but they're not. They're sort of like hieroglyphs. They have symbols and stuff like that, and you see them all across the walls inside the temple, in one of the temples in particular. And I was looking at a book recently written by Carl Jung, and he has using almost exactly the same kind of symbols, but yet it's probably 100 years before that. So you have to stop and ask yourself, where is this connected somehow?
Well, those types of glyphs are really universal.
Yes.
In archaeological finds, they come up over and over again. The Damanhurian language, or if that's what we want to call it, the glyphs, the language is also represented in numerically. It's represented in dance as well. They have dance forms where they actually basically kind of spell out these glyphs. And there's another form of the language as well, another written form. But yeah, it's interesting. We were just down in the Southwest and noticed the rock paintings there and saw some of the same, very similar sorts of glyphs on the rock walls.
Mm-hmm.
Very similar, and you see it in South America. And I'm curious, since you're an artist, of what your hit on Falco's paintings.
On Falco?
Falco's a very prolific artist, and I'm just wondering what you thought about his artwork.
Well, I thought his artwork was, I think the fact that it's unique and he's a self-taught artist is interesting because of the simple fact that he has a singular vision that's sort of, I have to think that he's an antenna of sorts, and he and his body are simply the vehicle for distribution of that information. Yes. I think that he sort of serves as a conduit in all ways. I mean, he's physically a human being, tangible, but he has that element of him, and I'm using all these words very carefully because I think of element, I think of copper, I think of him as a conduit. So I think of him as a link between the above and the below, and I think that's probably the only way I can describe him.
Well, his art's so unique. I mean, I'm familiar with Alex's work, and there's kind of a similarity, but Falco's work is, the paintings are done for healing purposes. They're created for healing.
And that's what I do. I mean, I do work as a healer, using art as a healing form too, but it's much different.
Right. I just never seen anything like Falco's, and apparently, he's created over 10,000 paintings, which is a phenomenal library of work.
So you almost feel like there is something superhuman about that characteristic, and I think of him. I have interviewed many artists who have a similar characteristic as Falco through the course of my journeys as a journalist and as a radio person, and they do have a characteristic which makes you think as if there is a receiver in their brain that is getting transmitted information from some other part of the world, as odd as that may sound, but that really, you almost can't grasp how someone could be so prolific in such a period of time. It almost seems superhuman.
No one has ever seen him paint, and I talked to an art restorer who is a Damanhurian who works on all of his paintings if they need repair, and she says it's so difficult to work on his paintings because he uses these alchemic compounds and these metallics, and she says it's almost impossible to duplicate what he's done, and he seldom does the same thing twice in terms of what he puts in these paints, and the fact that no one has ever seen him paint. He does. Yeah,
there's similar themes that run through themes, and the alchemy is a very big piece. I think that's probably the most common component of it. And so, that does make makes your mind wander as to how this all happens. And And I think that your film brings that out very clearly. By the way, we're going to be taking a break in a few minutes, but my guest today is Keith Busha. He is a independent film producer, and he just produced a film called The Dreams of Damanhur. And Damanhur is a artist and sort of forward-thinking community that is in northern Italy, tucked inside of a mountain, literally. And I had the good fortune of being there right around this time last year. I was there at a time of year when it was very quiet and the campus was fairly, there was nobody there. There was no guest there. I had the good fortune of touring the temples with Platypus, who is one of the members of the commune, and that is his name. That's his animal name is Platypus, and he informed me of all of this. And so we're talking about this remarkable topic, and it's my great honor to have Keith on today to talk about this society. And I think that what's one of the best ways people can get a hold of your film, Keith?
I'm so glad you asked. Best way right now is through the website, and it's just dreamsofdamanhur.com. And okay. Damanhur is Damanhur.
And that'll be linked up to my website, right. www.chrisflisher.com. When this is all connected, you'll be able to get that from my site. And so we're discussing we're going to elaborate a little bit more, I think, in the second half of the show. I just got to take a quick break here. But what we're going to talk about a little more is some of, I guess, our mutual impressions of what this place was like. And I'm going to ask Keith to sort of perhaps describe, if you can, a little bit more, some of the outward-lying communities that are part of this group. And then there's some fantastic film footage of some very unusual things that happened while you were there, which I found to be fascinating. So we'll be back in about 2.5 minutes. And you're listening to Turning of the Wheel. My name is Chris Flisher. I'm speaking today with Keith Busha, who has just produced this wonderful film called The Dreams of Damanhur, which is about a fantastic, futuristic artist commune in northern Italy. So if you want to hear more about some fantastic things, stay tuned.
What is your destiny? Where are you going? What is your real purpose? Do you know? Do you want to know? Of course you do. It's your duty to yourself. We are all here for a reason, and we all have great potential. Discover all of this and more with a professional astrology reading. My name is Chris Flisher, and I can help you. Discover your strengths and work on your weaknesses, and live your life to its fullest capacity. Based on your birthday, birthplace, and birth time, an authentic astrology reading will allow you to live your life to the fullest and reveal your true purpose. Only real astrology can give you real information. It is your destiny, and it is your path. Write me at chris@chrisflisher.com and book a reading today. Or call me at 978-393-1036. That's 978-393-1036. www.chrisflisher.com.
Astrology is the science of spirit, and it can serve as an invaluable aid in making the difficult choices in life and seeking truth in all the directions we choose. It holds the potential to allow each of us to evolve to our highest potential. It is the logic of the universe, the code of existence, and the pathway to true wisdom. It is our duty to draw from it the instructions for our lives and to live them to our fullest potential. As the great wheel turns, we are best prepared when we are best informed.
Hi, your host, Chris Flisher here. I've been producer and host of this podcast and radio show for the past 10 years. My goal has always been to provide enlightening, progressive, and logical discussions about where we are as a species and how we move ourselves further down the road towards our greater potential. I believe astrology provides a great tool for observing our progress and awakening our consciousness to becoming a whole, better, and more complete individuals. I have sought to invite the best contemporary guests, thought leaders, and progressive minds to discuss topics that concern us all, regardless of your beliefs. Consider making a contribution through PayPal to help keep the great wheel turning so that I can continue for the next 10 years along the same enlightened path. As always, I thank you for your support.
Okay, everyone, welcome back to Turning of the Wheel. My name is Chris Flisher. That's probably the fastest, the slowest 2.5 seconds you ever heard. I meant to say 2.5 minutes, but anyway, we're back. My guest today is Keith Busha, and we are talking about Dreams of Damanhur. Now, Damanhur is a remarkable spot in northern Italy that has been there for roughly, 25, 30 years. And Keith, why don't you give us a little bit of the background so people can get a clearer picture of what this remarkable spot is all about?
Well, the short story is that Falco, Alberto Arauti, at a very young age, as an Italian, started to have visions of something he wanted to do in his life, which was to create a temple complex. And he started an organization in Turin, the Horus Society. They traveled and looked for the appropriate spot, which took them a couple of years. They found a spot in northern Italy. He bought the mountain top and decided to dig into the mountain a temple complex. While this was happening, and this was done in complete secrecy, while this was happening, they also built a intentional community with its own government, its own currency, they developed their own language, and slowly more and more businesses, because it took a tremendous amount of money to do all of this. So over a period of about 25 years, they built the temples, and they had gone to war with the Italian government because they had no building permits, and the Catholic Church was putting a lot of pressure on the Italian government to have the temples destroyed, because obviously there's nothing Catholic about them at all. There's no religion there. It's not based on a religion, and it's not based on a dogma. They seem to honor all deities equally. And at this point, what it is a very multi-factional community. They have a lot of scientific work they do, both traditional and esoteric physics are studied there. They have workshops, they have healing centers, and as Chris and I were talking about, it just goes on and on. That's the short story.
The long story is in the film.
The long story is in the film, and even that, when I did the film, it was originally for television, and the idea was to do an hour overview and then come back and do more on specific parts of the community. That was the challenge in making the film. To tell this story at all in an hour is very difficult.
It's almost impossible. I mean, we don't even begin to scratch the surface here. First of all, just trying to describe the artwork itself is almost impossible for human words, because I've tried repeatedly ever since being there to do that. It's impossible. You really do need to see photographs of it at least. And then to get a feel for what it's like to be there can, I think, only be experienced by being there. When I was walking through the temples, and I'm, 15 stories underground, and there's this phenomenal artwork everywhere, and you're in the midst of this, there's this very weird, and I think you said it very clearly, this sort of electricity that permeates the air that just, it's hard to describe. You almost feel like you're possessed, or that you're in a dream land, or in an altered state of some sort.
Mm-hmm. I felt that, and it wasn't consistent with me either. There were times when I felt the force was an oppressive force when I was in the temples. I've been in the temples many times. Sometimes I felt a tremendous energy going through me, and sometimes I felt like I just had to get out of there, like it was a heaviness. And apparently there is some kind of electronic mechanism that they can actually dial in what they want the air to feel like in there. Not just the air, but the ether, I guess we could say. And that's the only thing I can attribute it to. And I went in with one of my crew went in, big burly guy, union filmmaker, cameraman guy, and he went in and he started crying. And I couldn't get him to even walk through the temples. He got into the first chambers, and I just saw him over in a corner crying. And so it obviously had, really can push buttons.
Yeah, I think I could easily see that happening to myself. I mean, when I was there in the temples, I have to say, honestly, I felt almost fearful, and then I totally went from being fearful, and I think it was just because it was so unfamiliar to me, and I was under 15 stories underground. May have had something to do with it, but But when I got over that, and I totally sort of switched that fear into complete and utter love. I mean, it sort of went the exact opposite, which I think was a nice juxtaposition of emotions to be able to experience in a place like that.
Yeah, it does do something. I mean, you can't go through and not be affected.
No, I will never be the same, and I think it's remarkable. And you know, when we talk about it, we've both been there. People probably say, "Yeah, right. It's like going to Disney World," but this ain't no Disney World. Trust me, this is the real McCoy. And if ever there was anything, a place that you wanted to call as a pilgrimage, just for enlightenment, and doesn't have a dogma, as you mentioned, and they are open to all possibilities, and therefore, I think that makes it incredibly representative of where humanity needs to go. It needs to go to the spot of oneness, where it doesn't matter what you do or where you are from, you are welcomed. Right.
And also, I think it would be good for people to know that if you go there, there's no preaching. Nobody prophesizes. Nobody is trying to change your mind about anything, specifically anything to do with spirituality or belief systems. The temples are kind of a book, and they were created so that somebody could walk through the temples, and through the murals and the frescoes and the writing, they could tell the whole story of humanity. But this isn't a place where you come and they're selling you timeshares or selling you, any kind of belief system. I've never seen that happen there. They're open to talking with people about belief systems and about religious issues, spiritual issues, but if you want to learn more about their belief system, you're welcome to attend classes, but you're not fodder for them when you come.
No, there's no sense of trying to be. No one's trying to convert anybody to do anything. You're just there to witness.
Right, absolutely. And I think they're hoping to be a model in their way for a lot of things that they're doing.
Which is what I like the most. That's the thing I think that's most appealing to me, is that I think this is a working model of what could be.
Right. Well, the United Nations agrees. The United Nations gave them the honor of being the most sustainable community in the world, the Gen Award, because they have managed to do all of these different things in terms of sustainability. And now they're giving workshops on that. They have been for the last couple of years, giving workshops on how to create sustainable communities. But they'll be the first to say, "Don't copy us."
Right. And the thing, that's a good point. And the thing is that when you think about these societies that we're talking about, a sustainable society like this, you typically would think, well, eventually, at some point in time, they're going to get down to the bickering or the the sort of the things that happen when people get together. And you don't get that there. You don't seem to get that,
I don't think. I think, for one thing, they're very bright people, and they've worked out ways to deal with this. In terms when there's a problem, they don't just brood about it. They've got mechanisms for how to deal with it. And this was part of how, when they structured their government, they had to figure out, how can we actually make this work for this large number of people. I have never seen bickering, but I know that things don't always go smoothly there, and they don't. It's everything they touch doesn't turn to gold. They've had many businesses that have had to fold because they just didn't work. But they believe that evolutionary process is a good thing. It flushes out the stuff that doesn't work and encourages them to change.
Yeah, it sort of does. I mean, that's sort of part of the process. I think it's very interesting. I mentioned earlier that in the course of the film, there's some very unusual things that almost seem hard to believe, and I think you did a sort of a good job of handling how those things struck you, especially the time. There's this one scene where you're talking with one of the women about the fact that plants actually create music,
right?
And so she has a plant with a sort of like a clip attached to one of the leaves, and then it goes through something and it's attached to a keyboard. And by having the plant sitting there, the plant is actually playing the keyboard per se, or so to speak. And
well, it is. Yeah.
It is, exactly.
It is. It's a phenomenal experience. They have about 50 different patents on this technology, and it's work that's been done by other groups around the world, but they actually have the patents on all of this now. And it allows plants to interact with people. And one of the uses, one of the many, is making music. And you can sit and actually play music with the plants, and the plant will play back through a synthesizer. And I've had the experience of playing with them where we actually made music together. And in the film, the plant was a little camera shy, and it wasn't our greatest concert together. But just the fact that it could do it at all is amazing. That the plant has a mechanism for hearing, but more importantly, the plant wants to play. The plant wants to engage, say, the human, me, in this little game of playing music. Mm-hmm. And once that happens, it's just a phenomenal feeling. And then they have other uses, of course, like the plants can turn on the lights and turn on the irrigation systems in their greenhouses. The plants can open doors. The plants can turn on lights. So that's one of their technologies that's quite amazing. I can't wait to see where that goes. But there are many others. They developed a diagnostic testing for saliva, a medical testing that they've got all of the patents on too. That I think is going to be a big item in the future. They have patents on alternative fuel sources. Their science labs are really, really well equipped, and the Italian universities are in some areas coming to Damanhur to do the research because Damanhur has more advanced equipment. Their labs.
You know, it's interesting. I think because you know what it kind of is like. This is an interesting analogy, and this just came to me. You know, when you think of the Beatles never went to music school, and yet they created the most beautiful music in the world because they were not held back by the conventions of what traditional music would teach them. Mm-hmm. I think Damanhur has a similar characteristic where they're not held back by what conventional wisdom would teach them, and as a result, they're much freer to create in ways in which we would never imagine.
Right, almost like a child.
Yes.
Yeah.
There's a certain innocence to it that says, well, you know, why can't the plant play me a song? It's sitting there. Why can't it start singing to me?
Right. Why can't we build this temple inside of this mountain?
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, you know, it's just a mountain. You know, it's only 5 million tons of earth we've got to move, but you know, let's do it.
Right. I think that's true, and I think that's one of the things that's really, you know, it tickles me. It's almost like a childlike. Well, I wouldn't say they're naive, but they just don't want to hear the negative stuff.
No, they don't.
They don't have time for it. They're not going to get things done if they listen to the naysayers.
It's so easy to go there. I mean, it's so easy to be naysayer, but they just say, no, trot on, let's go, we're going to figure this out. Yeah.
And they're determined, and they do it. And this is one of the things that, you know, over the years here has really impressed me is I look back and things that they have talked to me about 5 years ago have come true over and over again. And when I first went there, you know, they would talk to me about things, projects they're working on, and I thought, oh boy, you know, good luck, because they seemed kind of pretty out there, and now they're a reality.
They are reality. I know.
I got an email from them yesterday, and they're sending me some footage of this beef that they're growing, and I've been following this for years, and I've got a little bit of footage of it in the movie.
I saw that, yeah.
Okay, at that time, when in the movie, there was just a little glob of meat cells, and it took them years to get that much, and a lot of money. Now, apparently, they've got a real massive beef that they're able to create. And, of course, the concept is to be able to eat beef, protein, without having to raise and kill animals.
Right.
Because they are, almost all of them are Italians, and Italians eat meat.
Right.
They're not vegetarians. And so, I mean, here they are creating beef cells, and not cloning it. They're doing it through a culture. And their hope is to be able to get all of their animal protein that way.
Yeah, when you hear stories like that, I think you have to just say, this is, there's something, it is phenomenal, because it's almost beyond words to think of that concept. And yet it's the ability to really just forge on with any sort of possibility without any regard to any blockages whatsoever. Just that open, wide-eyed, open wonder that says, yes, we're going to go try to do this, that enables them to do that. And you almost got to be willing to sort of subscribe to that way of that thought process, that anything is possible.
Well, and also I think another big factor here is they don't care about being judged in the outside world. Like when they do their time travel experiments, they publish some of this, the results, and I asked Falco, I said, weren't you worried about being judged and being made to look kind of silly by much of the world with this time travel? And he said that doesn't matter to him. The people that needed to know would know, and the people that didn't believe it, that's fine too. They could care less. They just wanted to put it out there for the people that they felt would be interested to know the results of this time travel work.
Some of the time travel, I actually sat in on a workshop there with one of their elderly, sort of sage-like psychologists, and she was all through an interpreter, so I had to sort of take that at the same time that I was listening to this conversation. But it was all about the concept of time and how we view time and how human beings have sort of put or earthlings, whatever we are, has put a construct on what time is all about, because we think of ourselves as having a past, a present, and a future. But their take on time is radically different, or can be radically different, so that what we're doing now has an impact in the past, if that makes any sense.
Right. It's a combination of kind of esoteric physics, which they study, and quantum physics.
Yeah.
The fact that time isn't a straight line, it's not a box, it's this very wiggly thing that doesn't really have a form, and the beginning and the end are the same. And this is, heady stuff.
It is, and it's hard for us to grasp, because these are concepts that we are living in a very physical world. We can't really grasp them that quickly.
Right. I know I can't. I mean, I read about quantum physics, and I went to Damanhur to interview a man who was one of the great quantum physics professors in the world, and I thought, well, I should study up on this, and so I got quantum physics for dummies and everything else I get. And, I read it, and I would go, I get it, turn the page. I couldn't really remember what I just read. It's so complex and like you say, so hard to get a grasp on, but they seem to understand it, I believe. And I think this time research is another thing. At first I didn't know what to think with the time travel. But now, after I've talked to so many people that have been through it or have done the work, I think they're onto something, and I think these experiments have really happened, and I think they're reluctant to talk about them now, because why? What's the point of talking about them? It's their own private research. But I think it's absolutely fascinating. And this gets done inside of the temple, this time travel work.
Yeah, it's fascinating. This is typically a show about astrology, art, spiritual adventure, and I guess this topic comes under the umbrella of spiritual adventure, because it certainly is a place where we go, where I have been, and my guest Keith Busha has been, to record this film called Dreams of Damanhur, what we're talking about today. And that whole concept of the sort of the spiritual adventure piece that we were talking about, and where they're going. I do know that astrologically, wearing my other hat, that we are about to enter into a time when we're going to see radical departure and radically new things coming out of the Earth. We're at the beginning. We're soon going to be coming up in the beginning of the zodiac wheel, which is at Aries 0 degrees. And when Uranus, the planet of revolution and invention, gets to that spot, we're going to see enormous new stuff happen. And I wouldn't be surprised at all if it didn't come from Damanhur.
I wouldn't either, Chris. Nothing would surprise me anymore. I don't know what time frame you're talking about, though.
Well, it's within the next couple of years. I mean, Uranus is moving its way up to the beginning, and typically when a planet like Uranus, which is a planet representing, sort of radical new inventions, out of the blue, revolution, it's all these blasting new concepts. It's huge. Uranus is responsible for that. When it hits 0 degrees Aries, it's going to be a radical time of that sort of revelation. So it's going to be, I think we're going to begin to see things coming out of Damanhur that are going to shake the world. I really do. I do, too. And there's no group more progressive that I know of on the planet than Damanhur. Yeah. In terms of the work they're doing. I've looked for them, and I'm sure you have, too. And they are so far in the forefront that nothing even comes close. That's what is one of the most impressive things about, I think, Damanhur is the sense of futurism. And the futurism, I think, is it's sort of where we you have to sort of focus on the future, and you say, well, how do we get there? And you look at something like Damanhur, and they are just getting there. That's what they're doing. They're just getting there. Right. They're doing it. Yeah, they're doing it. Well, stay tuned on that. Yeah, I think that there's like something. We're building to something here that's going to happen soon, but it's just so hard to tell what the form will be. But I think most people sense that something's coming. So when we talk about Damanhur, we talk about it in sort of broad, sweeping terms. Obviously, there's the beauty of the art and the utter sheer phenomenal amount of it, and the complexity of which is phenomenal. Then we have the community of them. We have the scientific portion of them. We have the sort of the social structure of this peace and harmony that they have sort of embedded. And you really can see a microcosm of what the macrocosm could be through the representation of what Damanhur is all about. I think we're working our way towards that. Right. I was just going to add to that, I think another important thing with the community, and it's not one of the more sensational things, but how they've approached eco-building there. I don't know if you got tours of any of the homes, but... I did. I actually had dinner with a bunch of people there one night, yeah. Yeah, I mean, the homes, there too, talk about progressive. They've invented these different kinds of building materials, and it's just one amazing thing after another that they worked into these homes in terms of design. These homes need almost nothing to be heated in the winter, and the winters are pretty rough up there. It is. They're up in the Alps. It's up in the Alps, yeah. And so now they've branched out, and they're doing designing architectural work, and they have a building company that goes out and builds these eco homes. But that was a real treat for me too, to see the efficiency of these homes. Yeah, and they're beautiful. They are beautiful, and they are beautiful. It kind of makes you want to go there. It's like Swiss Family Robinson or something like that. Right. Yeah, I know. You think of a community, you think, oh, they're going to be living in teepees, and like you say, eating brown rice and tofu, and then you go, and it's as far from that as you can imagine. I mean, everybody's dressed up. They're wearing nice clothes. They have beautiful jewelry. They live a very nice, sophisticated, urbane kind of lifestyle. You wouldn't feel at all out of place there if you went there, and then you're surrounded by this phenomenal beauty of these temples and this art, and it's just, it's like nirvana, I guess. Right. Some way. At least that was my impression. I felt very, very comfortable there. I felt very much at home. So. Interesting. I just read something on the internet the other day about a woman who had come to Damanhur, and she was complaining because the people didn't devote a lot of time to spending with her, and she thought they would be more chumming around and hanging out, and you have to realize going there that this isn't Disneyland. This isn't a show. These people are working all day long, every day, without any vacations, any break in their lives, because they've got things to do. They're very, very busy people, and they encourage people to come and visit, but they can't stop their work. No, they're sort of they're in working mode, and that's their modus operandi. Yeah, it's really the only mode they know. Yeah, you never see them, or rarely outside of dinner or lunch. You don't see them just hanging out. I mean, Falco doesn't hang out at all. No, it's just too much for them. Well, we've got to go, unfortunately.
Okay.
My guest today has been Keith Busha. He wrote and produced this wonderful film called Dreams of Damanhur. You can link to it from my website, and it'll take you back to www.dreamsofdamanhur.com. Is that correct?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. And I encourage every person on this planet who is within sound of my voice right now to look into what Damanhur is doing, because I think you will be incredibly astounded about what the future might possibly hold for us all. And Keith, thank you very much for bringing this to the world through your art and your own vision of what Damanhur is. And I thank you very much for being on the show today.
Thank you, Chris. It's been a great chat.
Yeah, we'll talk to you soon.
Let's do it again.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to Turning of the Wheel with your host, Chris Flisher. To schedule a reading with me or to order artwork, you may visit my website at www.turningofthewheel.com. That's www.turningofthewheel.com. Or you can call me at 978-393-1036. Thank you. And as always, be open to possibilities.